Your silent obedience and unwavering faith have become a testimony echoed in heaven. It was never about the applause of the world, the recognition from those around you, or validation from the systems of man. You walked through valleys that no one else understood, made decisions that looked foolish to others, and stood firm in your calling when it would have been easier to compromise. There were seasons you cried yourself to sleep, wondering if God even noticed, if your obedience mattered, or if your sacrifices were all in vain. But even then, in the silence, you chose to believe. You chose to remain steadfast, not because it was easy, but because something deep within you knew God, still writing your story. The weight of being chosen doesn't always come with crowns or celebrations. It often comes with the burden of isolation, the pain of misunderstanding, and the tests that refine character in the hidden places. While others ran ahead for approval, you waited on God's timing. While some compromised for quick success, you remained anchored in your convictions. You prayed when no one saw, fasted when it hurt, and loved when it cost you. This was not because you were perfect, but because you were loyal. Loyalty in the face of confusion. Obedience when nothing made sense. Faith when faith itself felt. Like a distant memory in the invisible realm, every step you took in obedience became a ripple in eternity. Angels leaned in to watch your choices. Demons trembled when you refused to give in. Heaven recorded every moment you turned away from temptation. Every time you showed kindness when bitterness would have been easier. Every act of humility when pride tried to take over. Your obedience was not small in heaven's eyes. It was a declaration that you belonged to God, no matter the cost. That your allegiance was not to comfort or popularity, but to the one who called you by name before you were even formed in the womb. You may have felt insignificant, forgotten, pushed aside. But in the courts of heaven, your story has become one of boldness and grace. You didn't need to be loud to be heard in heaven. Your silence spoke volumes. Your inner battles, fought in prayer and tears, shook the gates of hell. There is a depth in your story that cannot be explained by mere surface-level views. Those who see you now cannot comprehend the weight you've carried, the sacrifices you've made, the quiet yes you whispered in the dark when no one was watching. But God saw it all, and heaven has taken note. There's a reason your obedience triggered attacks. The enemy fears those who walk in obedience without needing external validation. Your quiet faith is louder in the spirit realm than any public display. It is obedience without an audience that terrifies hell. You obeyed when no one applauded, remained faithful when no one supported you, and loved when you were the one bleeding. This is the obedience that heaven celebrates. It's not because it was seen by man, but because it revealed your heart to God. Your name has become a testimony in heaven. Not because you were always strong, but because you never stopped trying. Even when you were weak, you leaned on God. Even when you fell, you got back up. Your resilience, rooted in trust, has become a powerful narrative. The heavens are not impressed by the powerful, the wealthy, or the visible. They are moved by those who obey in obscurity. Your hidden obedience has become your highest form of worship, and that worship has ascended like incense before the throne of God. The very moments that felt the most painful were also the moments when your faith shined the brightest. When you lost what mattered most and still praised God. When you were betrayed but chose not to retaliate. When the door was slammed in your face, but you still believed in His promise. That kind of obedience is what makes heaven rise in honor. That kind of obedience is what gets written into the eternal records. That kind of obedience is why your story is being told in the chambers of heaven today. You may have wondered why you were overlooked by people, misunderstood by leaders, or rejected by systems. But God never needed the approval of man to validate your calling. You were chosen not for who noticed you, but for how you responded when no one did. God saw the moments you said yes when it cost you friends, platforms, comfort, and convenience. That yes, that faithful surrender, became a resounding sound in heaven that continues to echo. You didn't need to shout about your obedience because your life became the sermon. You lived it. You didn't just talk about faith, you walked it. Through trials, through setbacks, through seasons of silence, through long nights and broken dreams. Your walk testified of a deeper truth, that you were committed to God, not because of what he gave, but because of who he is. And that kind of loyalty is rare. That kind of obedience is precious. The heavens are not moved by talent or appearance, but by character forged in the fire. You are being shaped in silence, trained in trials, and developed in the hidden places. Obedience isn't about convenience, it's about surrender. And you have surrendered over and over, trusting God when nothing made sense. You've let go of what you wanted to hold on to, forgiven when it wasn't deserved, and served when you were weary. Every moment of this obedience added bricks to your eternal legacy. God is not just watching from afar, He is telling your story. In heaven, your testimony is being shared not as a tale of perfection, but as a story of relentless faith and devotion. Angels have witnessed your journey. Your life has become a living letter of obedience written by the Spirit of God, not on tablets of stone, but on the heart of eternity itself. You've become an example of how the lowly confound the wise, how the broken become vessels of glory, how the quiet become thunder in the Spirit. Obedience, when it's hardest, becomes the purest expression of love. In your story, love for God has triumphed over fear, pain, and weariness. You have shown that true faith doesn't always roar, it sometimes whispers through tears. Yet even those whispers shook the heavens. The obedience you walked in when no one saw is now being proclaimed in a realm beyond what eyes can see. God is publicly honoring you in the spiritual realm for battles you fought in private. There are moments in life when the deepest struggles happen behind closed doors, where no one sees, no one applauds, and no one understands the weight you are carrying. These are the moments that break most people, the times when giving up seems easier than pressing forward, but you chose differently. You chose to endure. You chose to stand in the gap, to pray through the silence, to worship through the pain, and to believe when the evidence gave you every reason to doubt. What others failed to notice, heaven recorded with detail. Your private battles became spiritual warfare, and you stood on holy ground, even in the midst of your weakness. There were nights you cried and still got up. The next morning, with a heart willing to serve, you were betrayed but chose not to be. Bitter, you were ridiculed but still showed love. You faced rejection and walked away with grace instead of revenge. This is what sets you apart as chosen. The battles you fought were not just for your benefit, but for generations you'll never meet. You were pushing through generational curses, breaking invisible chains, and declaring freedom over bloodlines. Others only saw your quiet exterior, but they had no idea about the storms you were calming in the spirit. What looked like endurance to them was actually victory. They thought with silence was a roar in heaven. Because of this, God is honoring you now. You didn't need a stage to be significant. Your altar was built in secret. Your greatest sacrifices were never broadcast. Your victories were not won through public applause, but through quiet obedience in the fire. You interceded for others while needing prayer yourself. You gave when you had little. You chose righteousness when sin would have felt like relief. You forgave when holding a grudge would have been more satisfying. These are the acts that move heaven. These are the decisions that make you a warrior in God's eyes. The applause of men fades, but the recognition of heaven is eternal, and it is your portion. There is a reward being released in realms unseen. And it's not based on popularity or performance, but on purity and perseverance. The King of Kings is speaking well of you. In the throne room of heaven, your name is not whispered, is declared. The very angels who fought alongside you are celebrating your endurance. You remember when you almost quit, when your knees buckled under pressure, when your prayers felt unanswered, and yet you pressed on. They saw when the enemy came in like a flood and you still lifted up a standard. That standard was your faith, and your faith became your shield. The darkness thought it had won many times, but you kept rising. You were being watched not by people, but by heaven. The honor being placed on you is not earthly. It is spiritual, divine, and unshakable. It is the kind of honor that cannot be taken away, because it was not given by men. We have proven trustworthy. With pain, with process, with the stretching that comes with growth. God saw the way you didn't retaliate. didn't abandon your values, didn't lose your integrity even when no one was there to pat you on the back. There's something sacred about suffering that is endured in silence. It transforms you, matures you, and sharpens your discernment. What was sent to destroy you became the very soil that grew your strength. The moments you felt abandoned were actually divine appointments to encounter God at a deeper level. When the applause died and the crowds disappeared, you found the voice of God clearer than ever. You learned to hear him.